Caution. The AJ and Quill show contains D&D content and is intended for a D&D audience. And, besides that, they're really weird.
Meta adjacent, Meta Minute. In Call of the Netherdeep, the new adventure from Dungeons & Dragons, you get to go into Matt Mercer's world of Exandria, and from there, it takes you into an eldritch underwater realm. Inside this adventure, there is a rival party that your adventuring party gets to face off against. The story's rivals were devised to emphasize the fact that player characters aren't the only adventuring party in the world, because of course they're not. It also puts a competitive pressure on your player characters and keeps them motivated and invested throughout the campaign's plot, because your rivals might beat you to it. Here's your meta-adjacent meta-minute quick tactics for
Maggie Keeneyes, Galstrad Ardith, and Irvin Wastewalker.
But let's check out Maggie first.
Right. Maggie Keeneyes. People might laugh when this 12-foot-tall ogre orders a drink at a bar and says her name is Maggie, but they don't laugh for long. Some people fixate on her name, her enormous size, her muscles, or the weapon she bears at her side. Wiser folks take notice of Maggie's bright blue eyes. All her life, people have considered Maggie a stupid meathead because of her size. But her eyes betray an intelligence. She can read others with a glance, whether in conversation or in a duel. When her eyes dart back and forth across the battlefield, they take in enough information to give her allies an advantage in the fight. Now Maggie's goal is to spar with a true tactical genius. Write a song or poem that causes someone to weep with emotion, and to be able to retire and never have to kill again. Now when you look at Maggie's stats, even though she does have a pretty high wisdom and intelligence, you can see that her primary offensive ability is going to be her strength.
And her primary defensive ability is Constitution.
Right, this would give her the ability profile of a melee tank. And as much as she doesn't want to be known as a dumb meathead tank, she's going to fight exactly like a dumb meathead tank.
Tanks are melee range weapon users who protect themselves by absorbing damage.
Right, and they do this with high armor class, lots of hit points, and a good constitution.
And they are pretty stationary in combat. They don't move around very much.
Now the main job of a tank is to occupy the enemy's attention by charging in and engaging them with melee combat.
Now a tank has to do enough meaningful damage in combat to be able to keep the enemies focused on them.
Now Maggie does have a really good intelligence and a pretty high wisdom, but this is going to be accounted for in combat by her tactical readiness feature.
Otherwise it won't really change how she behaves in combat.
Now, at the start of combat, if enemies are 40 feet or closer away from Maggie, she's going to charge in using her full movement speed of 30 and attack them with her giant maul.
The giant maul has a reach of 10 feet. That's why we say 40 feet away when her movement speed is 30 feet.
Now, in combat, Maggie's always going to try to knock the creature prone.
This is a function of her melee attack.
Being prone gives advantage to anybody attacking you in melee, and it makes it a lot harder for these enemies to escape.
Because they'll have to use half their movement just to stand up.
Now her giant maul also has a pushback effect. She could use this to disengage with enemies if she wanted to, or to force enemies into hazards like traps or spell effects.
She can also launch enemies at her other allies. That way they don't have to move to attack them on their next turn.
And the allies in melee would still benefit from that creature being prone.
Now if the enemy is more than 40 feet away, or if the enemy is flying, then Maggie will use her movement to get as close as possible to the creature, and then use her hammer toss ranged attack.
Now when she does this, if it's a flying creature, Maggie's always going to try to knock this creature prone, because unless that creature also has the ability to hover, then being knocked prone will make them fall to the ground.
So that she can run up and smash them.
Galsariad Ardyth. Beautiful, ethereal, deadly, shadowy. All accurately describe Galstrad Ardith, a drow in his 200th year of life. He's recently taken up the study of arcane magic, and he's pursuing the life of an adventurer in the hopes of improving his reputation within the Kryn Dynasty. Loquacious, Snarky and sarcastic to a fault, he's ready with a barb for any occasion, usually to mask his own insecurities. A city dweller from the Kryn capital of Roshana, Galstrad is blessed with sharp aesthetic sensibilities and an interest in ancient lore, especially history concerning the Age of Arcanum, Exandria's long-lost magical golden age. He's also the newest member of the Rivals party, and both Ao and Irvin are impressed by his ethereal elegance, and have a bit of a crush on him, even though he does talk too much.
Now Galsarad's goal is to match wits with an archmage, to discover a magical secret that no one else knows, and to be respected by someone whom he respects.
Now when you look at his stats, Galstrad is very obviously an arcane spellcaster. His primary offensive ability is intelligence, and his primary defensive ability is going to be dexterity.
Especially given that pitiful constitution of 8. Galsarad is an iconic glass cannon.
Right? Otherwise known as a caster DPS. Now, a caster DPS, or a glass cannon as they're more commonly known, are long-range spellcasters who protect themselves by avoiding damage.
They do this using distance, cover, and having a high dexterity.
And typically they don't move around very much. Usually they go find some cover at distance and stay there while casting spells into combat.
Now we say long-ranged, but what does that mean?
Now, long range essentially for a spellcaster means between 30 feet and the maximum range of their shortest ranged spell.
Blah, that's a mouthful.
Now, for Galsarad, this means he's usually going to be about 30 feet away from the bulk of the melee combatants.
And that's because of his drain potential ability, only having a range of 30 feet.
Now, the job of a caster DPS is to deal direct damage from long range into the melee fighting.
Now, when you look at his stats, you can see that he always has mage armor cast.
Right, since he can cast it at will, it's just always on. This means that in the first round of combat, the first thing that Galstrad is going to do is cast Gravity Wave.
Now this is a great area of effect ability, and if you check the target's in-area effect table in the Dungeon Master's Guide, you can see that he's going to try to always get at least 2 enemies inside the area of effect.
Right, while simultaneously trying to not hit any of his own allies. Now if he can't do this, then he'll just hit one enemy if he can, otherwise he won't cast this at all.
But keep in mind, he's going to try to cast this whenever it's not recharging.
Right, as a standing decision, this is going to be the priority feature he's going to want to use in combat.
It also has a pull effect that can be used to move enemies into hazards or traps.
Right, it can also be used to move enemies away from his allies so that they can retreat if they're taking a lot of damage.
Now this recharges on a 5 or a 6 roll, and you'll use it every time it comes off recharge.
Now, after casting Gravity Wave, Galsarad is then going to retreat to 30 feet away from the bulk of the melee fighting. And from there, he's going to try to get behind as much cover as possible. Now, that can include his own allies because they would provide at least half cover if he stood behind them.
On subsequent turns, Galsarad will cast Drain Potential from range.
Now, he can also use this ability from melee range, but if he's ever engaged in melee range, he's instead going to use his Distort Gravity feature as a bonus action. Now, this is kind of like an oh crap escape feature. If he's ever engaged in melee combat and he can't get away, on his turn he's going to use his bonus action to cast this.
Once he's in the air, he's then going to either cast Drain Potential or Distort Gravity if it's off recharge.
Irvin Wastewalker. The name Wastewalker conjures fear on the plains of Xhorhas. As the name of a clan of Xhorhasian nomads, Irvin, or Irv to his friends, was born into that clan, but he hates the name. He left his family when he was a teenager, struck out on his own across the wastes, and made his way to the city of Esaris. Even though the city of beasts was renowned for danger, Irv felt at home there in a way he never felt with his own clan. He earned a reputation for being a party animal who could get down with a dozen drinks in a night and still dance with the vigor and elegance of an archfey. Irv is young, just a few weeks past his 19th birthday, and he's secretly ashamed of his patchy beard and scrawny human frame. He has an even bigger secret related to that feeling. He was consecuted in another life. The act of consecution is a sacred Kryn ritual of rebirth through the mystical power of the Luxon. Irv has memories of his previous life as a bugbear in Den Hatheros, and he hopes to prove to himself that he can do great things without the aid of his powerful family in the Kryn Dynasty.
For his goal, Irvin wants to experience things he has never experienced before. Fall in love with someone who doesn't know about his past lifetime, and to appear mature despite his youthful appearance.
Now, when you look at Irvin's stats, you can see that his primary offensive ability is dexterity, and his primary defensive ability is
Dexterity.
Now, this is the ability profile of a hit-and-run melee damage dealer.
The typical rogue fighting style, which is the class we assume Irvin is.
And if you look at his dagger attack,
Dagger, dagger, dagger.
you can see it does additional poison damage. This is more than likely meant to fill in for doing sneak attack damage with a rogue.
Only without all the extensive rules that accompany it.
Now, a hit-and-run DPS is a medium-ranged melee weapon user, and they protect themselves by avoiding damage.
They do this by using distance and a high dexterity to avoid hits.
And they're very mobile. They're constantly moving on their turn in and out of combat.
Now the job of a hit-and-run DPS is to engage with key opponents when you're able to strike them for maximum damage, all the while avoiding any prolonged melee engagements.
Now, we say a medium-ranged melee fighter. Now, this means that they should stay approximately half their movement speed away from the bulk of the melee fighting.
And if you use the optional flanking rules,
And you should use those rules.
they're going to try to position themselves behind the enemies for a flank.
Now, because Irvin's dagger is both a melee and a ranged weapon, the way he's going to fight is he'll start combat being about 35 feet away from the bulk of the melee fighting.
On his turn, he'll use half his movement, approximately 15 feet, to get as close to his target as he can.
Now, this would make him about 20 feet away from his target, which is the perfect range for his dagger. He'll use his multi-attack to attack twice with his dagger, and then he'll use the remainder of his movement to retreat back 15 feet away from the bulk of the melee fighting.
Rinse and repeat.
Now, this changes a little bit if you use the optional flanking rules. Instead of being 35 feet away, Irvin is instead going to be around 15 feet away from the bulk of the melee fighting.
From there, he'll use half his movement, or 15 feet, to engage with any key melee opponent.
Right, and in doing so, he's going to make sure that he gains a flanking advantage with one of his other allies.
If he can't get the flanking advantage, he won't bother moving into melee range.
Once he's engaged with melee and has advantage from flanking, he's going to use his multi-attack to attack twice, and then he's going to retreat back 15 feet to where he started from.
Now, Irvin isn't too worried about suffering opportunity attacks from this.
Right, he has a pretty healthy pool of hit points, and he also has this fortitude feature, where if he is reduced to 0 hit points, he can make a constitution save and instead be reduced to 1 hit point.
Plus, this style of fighting will help waste the enemy's reactions so that your other allies don't trigger them.
Now, once he's used this fortitude feature, Irvin should definitely hightail it out of combat and not go back in.
If he's that low on hit points, he needs to stay at range and behind cover, like a caster DPS or a sniper.
Now, this style is pretty moot if you don't use the flanking rules, because it's just easier to stay at range. But with the flanking rules, that advantage actually makes a big difference.
Something important to note is that Irvin won't enter combat this way if he'll suffer more than one opportunity attack from leaving.
Right, going in and taking one single opportunity attack when he tries to disengage from combat isn't a big deal. But if he's going to start suffering multiple, he's not going to bother doing this, he'll just stay at range.
Now, something important to remember is that Irvin does not have infinite daggers.
Right, if you're going to use that first style of range combat, you got to remember that Irvin doesn't carry an infinite supply of weapons.
If he throws his weapons into combat every round, eventually he'll run out.
Now, to make this easy on the Dungeon Master, we're just going to assume that Irvin has 7 daggers on his person.
Since combat is designed to last approximately 3 rounds, this means Irvin could throw his daggers using his multi-attack every round and still have 1 dagger remaining.
Right, and once Irvin has thrown away 6 of his daggers over 3 rounds of combat, he's always going to maintain that 7th dagger for himself. He's not going to throw away his last weapon just in case he needs it. And that's it. We know this is really quick and we tried to cover a few of these rivals all inside one video. Hopefully you enjoy this and you get to use these rivals in any upcoming Call of the Netherdeep game.
They're a lot of fun, so hopefully you enjoy it.
And until next time, keep playing, have a great time, thanks for tuning in, we love you guys, and... Is it time for school yet?
Bye!
Yeah, 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 yeah.